Hi, I'm Jake Kouns, CEO of Risk-Based Security. Welcome to this edition of The Right Security, the show which we spend time talking with leaders and veterans in the security space, tackling the issues of the day. Today I'm joined by Christine Gadsby. Christine is Vice President of Product Security at BlackBerry. In order to drive product and software supply chain security efforts at BlackBerry, she's focused in a lot of areas, including SDLC capabilities, application security research, automation and security tooling, risk mitigation strategies, incident response, and even more. Right now, she seems to be working on the NIST SSDF, ISO 29147, ISO 3111, open source software licensing compliance, attack surface management, and SBOM efforts. It's kind of a mouthful these days, Christine, but you've been a known industry expert, keynote speaker. You've spoke at loads of conferences, including RSA, Black Hat, the IoT SF, and FIRST. I've known Christine for a while, and it's been really amazing to learn from her and watch how she applies security concepts that are talked about a lot, but apply those at actually a large software company. So Christine, it's been a long time. It's really great seeing you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Jake. It's awesome to talk to you again. I love talking with you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So today I want to spend some time catching up. I want to get your views about open source software as we normally talk about. And so there are a lot of questions and a lot of topics that apply in this space. So if you don't mind, we're going to jump right in here. And what I'm going to ask is that for our viewers that are still trying to learn and come up to speed here, can you maybe start quickly with sharing how you and BlackBerry, how you look at open source software? What is it in your mind, and why would you even want to use it?
Yeah, hey, that's a great question. And I think open source software in general allows companies to get to market quickly, right? It allows people to build in capability that, if you were going to write yourself as an engineering organization would take, eons of investment and forever. I believe that even companies that don't think that they need or use open source are always kind of surprised to find that they are huge consumers of open source. And, nowhere does that become more apparent when you're doing things like mergers and acquisitions, or, you're figuring out you have, attack surface that you didn't know. But really, open source kind of is the way. It's the way to build capability fast.
Makes sense. So at Black Hat in 2016, feels like a long time ago, you gave a presentation called OSS Security Maturity, Time to Put on Your Big Boy Pants. And I'm pretty sure you came up with that title from what I've heard, rumor has it. And at that time, you released the BlackBerry open source maturity model. Can you give a quick recap of that talk and talk a little, specifically about the maturity model, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That was a great talk. And back then, Jake, you and I did a lot of talking about this, but we were really just on the cusp of figuring out that open source was going to introduce attack surface that companies just weren't ready for. And it comes down to things like telemetry. And really this maturity model really focuses on, how to just be one with understanding that you do need open source software to release, products. But then if you do, how do you manage it? How do you look at that attack surface and that risk, that you inherently bring to, both your business and your customer's business in the supply chain? And how do you build a model around understanding it and being able to respond to it in market? And so really it focuses on a few things. One, it focuses on telemetry. It focuses on understanding your attack surface, and that software releases really are an opportunity to do one of two things, and one of two things only, which is where I see companies really missing kind of the understanding. Every single software release is a opportunity to increase or reduce attack surface. That's it. You're doing one of the two things. So really understanding how do you watch that? How do you understand it? How do you become realistic as a company in managing it? And still being able to get to market quickly to, continue and enhance the revenue cycle, because, that's important. And then what do you do once it's in market? How do you responsibly manage that attack surface? And how do you understand the vulnerabilities in your open source software? It's a huge, as you know, Jake, it's a huge dilemma to for companies to really watch the vulnerability landscape and, deal with that load and velocity of, open source vulnerabilities coming in daily to a product that's already in market. How do we update it? How do we keep it patched in market? How do we, make sure our customers are protected? So that talk was really around building a format for that and a program perspective, right? You have to manage that from its life cycle, and it's its own little mini business within your company. You've got to really treat it like, it's as important as you're generating revenue to make sure that revenue stream is protected. So really that talk was all about how do you look at it from a pyramid perspective, build one thing on top of the other, start here. It really gave you a place to start. And it's really interesting looking back on that talk, Jake. Oh my gosh, we were so right. The guidance was straight on. So, and back then we really thought, gosh, this is going to be a big thing. And now here we are. It's a big thing, right?
Yeah. So I think one of the greatest things about that talk was just you were just mobbed with people that wanted more and more about the maturity model, right? I mean, to think that was 5 years ago. Some days it feels like it was yesterday. Sometimes it feels like it was even longer than that. But that was a while ago. It was early on. But the model itself seemed to really resonate with people that were trying to figure out how to explain it to executives, where to start. So as for anyone that's watching, as always, we'll put links into it. It's a great talk. Please go and watch it. But I guess, has anything changed in the last 5 years to the model? Have you made updates to the model, or is there anything sort of more you can, before I force viewers to go watch the whole thing, anything else that you can, those key points that you think, wow, man, that model is spot on?
Yeah, you know what, Jake? One of the most amazing things that came out of that talk, if you remember, what we came forward with and what we sort of put out there was that we honed in on just a few libraries, right? We really wanted to know, what is the cost of maintaining free and open source software? I mean, it's free, but it's not free, right? It's, just like, I think I've seen several presentations, and I have one as well, where I have a picture of, my dog Lucy. When we got her and we got her home, we paid for her, and then, you don't really necessarily think about the cost of maintenance. And one day she gets into the garbage and causes a huge mess. Well, that's kind of the same parameters of putting free and open source software into your products. And I think the biggest thing that kind of came out of that talk, and I really ended up spending, and I'm still talking to, my peers and other companies about, is how to really dive in and look at the cost of open source software maintenance, right? So I took one library out of that talk, and I dove into, what is BlackBerry actually spending to maintain that library? Those are really key points to look at, because when you look at the build versus buy decision and you go back and you talk about how do you plan, it's great for every company to say, okay, well, we're going to take 10% or 15% or, X amount of dollars for software maintenance to, look at security and other things. But the reality is, unless you really know what those vulnerabilities and that open source software is costing you, it's really hard to sit down with an engineering team and say, okay, hey, I need 10% next year of your maintenance budget for, software patching, or for library updates, or for, security hygiene sweeps, or whatever. We really got into the nitty gritty. I spent a lot of time going back through my own engineering and my own team's work, and really looking at the cost and actually how much we were spending. And it was absolutely mind-blowing. We were spending a lot of money, some realized and some not, when you looked at how much it came down to, what is that actual cost? You ship a security update, you ship a maintenance update, but what's gone into that? How much does it cost? What does it look like to investigate that? What does your staff look like? How much time are you spending remediating all of that stuff? And I released some numbers, and it was pretty eye-opening. I got a lot. I still get companies asking me, how did you come up with all of that? And really, the answer there is, you just have to go and start digging. I did all that work by hand. I went and called a lot of people. I looked at a lot of, investigation data, and I used that. I used that to further sort of justify the spend. To be able to, look at our software security posture. When I started coming up with those costs and took that to the executive teams, there was a lot more head nodding that was understood on my job and how hard it is, number one. But number two, the need to spend money to remediate your attack surface. So that, I think, Jake, to answer your question, has probably been the biggest thing that companies really have garnered from that model, is that you really have to look at the actual dollars in and dollars out and make it a business. Because it's its own little mini kind of business when you look at free software that's not free. So that's probably the biggest thing I took away.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the saving money, time, resources, and whatnot, because I agree with you. That was one of the eye-opening things. And I have to say, I was really pleased and super impressed with BlackBerry at the time that they were willing to openly share with the industry about the problem. I mean, if you remember at that time, there was a lot of conversation, and no other companies were talking about this, right? I mean, they were not sharing in a way to help the industry, and it was all kind of looked at, well, if you openly say there's an issue and you're trying to fix it, well, then are you bad, right? And could the media use it against you and whatnot? So I got to give you and BlackBerry serious kudos for talking about this stuff at a time when people weren't talking about it. Now, I will say, I remember one of the things that really caught me off guard was when you were sharing, the number of libraries, dependencies used at the company across all products, and even in a particular product. That was so eye-opening. And so seeing some of those things where it was actually a real company come out and saying, yeah, this is a thing. Look at all these libraries. And remember the story you told about how sometimes different versions of the same library? I mean, that was big for you guys to do that.
Yeah. And you know what? That alone, I'm so glad you brought that up. That has been, I think I've had so many other executives call me and say, oh my gosh, we know this and we don't want to talk about it. Thank you so much for breaking that silence. We're in the same boat. And if you think about what's happened in the industry, Jake, and the supply chain since then, it's insane, right? All those things we were talking about, they've all proven to be true. The supply chain is a dependency after dependency after dependency after dependency, and there's version after version after version. And that attack surface, no matter how you look at it, it's yours to maintain. When you put that stuff in market, you have to own it. And I'm really fortunate to work for a company like BlackBerry that takes that so seriously, where we know it's our bread and butter. Not only do we develop secure software, but we have to maintain that secure software, and that starts with knowing what's in it, right? You're responsible for what's in it. And I cannot tell you again how many executives I talked to after that talk who were beside themselves because they had, really realized by doing some efforts to dig deep into their own supply chain, when they came up with X amount of versions of the same, OpenSSL version or whatever it was in their software, where they were very nervous about having to maintain all that. And really we're looking for advice on, hey, how do we reduce that? How do we go from 64 to 5? What do we set as a security baseline? How do we really monitor all of that open source? And Jake, it comes down to just what we thought it was going to come down to, which is automation. There are not enough humans. There just really aren't. So you have to build that telemetry, and you have to, work with a company like yourself to maintain that, just maintain that understanding of your own attack surface. It was pretty eye-opening, though. Lots of, I feel like there was a lot of engineering therapy that happened or needed to happen after that.
Yeah, I could keep asking tons of questions on that talk. So for anyone that's watching now that hasn't watched that talk, Christine provided like amazing numbers and models. Great. Please, please, please go watch it. So, but wait, I'm going to move on to the next talk. And for a long time, we here at RBS have been saying everything is vulnerable. And that while I still believe it's true, it drives me insane. You've even given me shout outs to it that, we just accept that software is horrible and it's just okay. But you did talk at Black Hat in 2018 that you called Stop That Release, There's a Vulnerability. And you did start to talk, if I remember, saying, I hate to break the news to you, but every software out there is flawed. And if someone tells you they're releasing perfect software, they're not telling the truth. Another great talk, again, I'll put the link in the show notes for everyone, but I got a bunch of questions for you on this talk as well. So I want to start off first with, can you give a little bit thoughts on the software needing maintenance? You started to go down that path a little bit more there. And then can you talk to us a little bit about the software ready review process and templates and those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. First of all, I will say another shocking thing that came off of that second talk, Jake, or third talk, was how many companies aren't looking at how many companies are shipping software of any kind and not looking at its attack surface before it goes out the door? That absolutely blew me away. It's one of those things where you kind of have a feeling, but you don't really know until people kind of reach out to you and ask for guidance or questions. And I will tell you that, the back then, and I think still to this day, we have this understated just industry norm of, well, I'm shipping secure software. And that is absolutely, if you're not looking at it before it leaves the building and there's no security gate or security review, then you're not shipping secure software, because that's reality. So one of the things that at BlackBerry we've developed is a software readiness review process that has many criteria, of which security is one, of course, because every company does this. But I think the unique thing that BlackBerry does is security is a criteria. So we understand when we're shipping software, has it met the pre-established security baselines that we've agreed upon? Because we have, security baselines that we as a company have agreed upon. We don't ship product without it. It goes through this really strenuous review. And business is business. If it comes to things that we need to look at, we look at them. And that is a CEO-driven marketplace fact. And, right now it is just, we're seeing the supply chain under attack. And it has become this process, I'm so glad we built it, because as you know, Jake, it is like steering the Titanic to change, product engineering processes when you have, lots of products flowing, lots of products in market, quick release cycles. It's difficult. So the fact that we built that, ages ago and are kind of, leveraging it so much these days is, just the great forethought that BlackBerry had about the need to ship and, keep products secure in market. I think I get a lot of questions on how to build that program. And the answer in our talk, one of the things we talked about is templatizing things like that and the need to create the baseline. I talked to so many executives who are just trying to figure out how to even create the baseline. What does a secure software release look like? What is, hampering the ability to generate revenue? And what is, okay to leave as maintenance? So templates are just critical and crucial here. And back in that talk, I think I actually shared the exact templates that we use, which is, what are you actually looking at in a software release? How are you actually kind of building a product security scorecard, right? The scorecard is critical. What did you do since the last release? What are you going to do at the next release? What is the attack surface that you're fixing? How are you communicating that to your customers? All of those great things, they're all really important to templatize and really important to automate. And if you're not starting that process, start now. It takes a while. So my advice to every, leader of any product security team or engineering team is start talking about that now.
So this kind of, some of the things you talked about within this talk have been building upon other ones. But can you talk a little bit about the security debt and security deficit when you were talking about maintenance? Give a little thoughts of what you were saying in 2018 and how you view the world now.
Yeah, absolutely. So security debt's interesting. Jake, especially with us releasing Jarvis as a product in the embedded space, I think, and I've talked to several leaders within other companies that would agree with me. Sometimes if you ask any team or company that's building software and they have this kind of false sense of security that everything is fine and everything is golden, and then they scan a binary and figure out that they have, number one, way more attack surface than they actually thought they did. And I'm talking at the binary level. They have way more attack surface than they thought they did, and they are, amiss and don't understand how to remediate the number of, CVEs that pop out like a piñata, like beating a piñata, and now it's Christmas time and they have, all these things, they have to worry about. And so I think especially when you use a tool like Jarvis and you figure out what that attack surface actually looks like, there's a need and a kind of a quick wake-up call to knowing what that attack surface is really like and trying to figure out how to do it or how to remediate or mitigate those vulnerabilities. And I think that is a needed maturity space that everybody needs to get to if they're shipping software. You aren't really going to know until you actually look at a binary and figure out what you're really shipping out the front door. And that can be an eye-opening experience, and it can be a very scary experience for if you've never really seen that amount of vulnerability debt on how to figure out how to solve it. So I think with looking at sort of that reality check that a lot of executives have had, especially again lately, what I think we're looking at right now, Jake, is a lot more people are being forced with, the upcoming executive order and, the SolarWinds attacks. I think a lot more companies are forced to look at this picture where, it's just kind of been a thing that we do, we ship products and updates, and now it's become more where you really need to strategize every release, and you need to really think about every release. What security fixes are we going to put in it? What are we going to leave for maintenance? Again, it all stems back to having that plan, starting with that security baseline and being able to create a process like a readiness review where you're really recognizing that there needs to be a gate every single time where you're really looking at that and making a conscious decision to, increase or reduce attack surfaces, because you're going to do one of the two.
One of the things you said in that talk, which struck me, and I hope it's not still the case, but I'm going to ask you, are you still finding people that are arguing over the definition of what is a vulnerability?
Not as much, right? Because remember back then it was this debatable topic, right? And now I think people are really leaning more towards everything is, right? Because we're seeing so many things exploited that, gosh, in our dreams, would we have ever thought things would be chained together and exploited like they are now? So I don't think so as much. I really think it's leaning towards we really need to clean up all the debt, and everything that's left is liability. So that's definitely something I feel like it's turned for the better, I would say, in this case, of being more realistic.
So in your Locomoco talk in 2019, and this talk was called Shifting Product Security from Forceful to Resourceful, and you and BlackBerry were early on with the product security team. So it was a really neat talk. Again, we'll drop notes in there. But one of the things that you said in that talk was, you said, without a doubt, SBOM, software bill of material regulation, it is definitely coming. And of course, in previous talks, you said it other times that, hey, regulation's probably coming. Maybe even said it'd be a little scary if it was coming. But in that 2019 talk, that was probably the firmest I've ever heard you say it. It was saying, this is coming, right? And lo and behold, now we have the new cybersecurity executive order that you just mentioned. So what are your thoughts currently on software bill of material? And can you maybe weave in what's the impact of this executive order?
Yeah, great question. We're focusing very heavily on that right now. So yes, back in 2000, I think it was probably 18 or 19, we really started looking at our own security posture as far as SBOM was really, there were a couple of things we thought about back then in SBOM, right? There's kind of two separate efforts for software bill of materials, right? I think there's a software bill of materials that you're going to create and maintain so that you understand your own software. And then there's the security software bill of materials that I feel like is going to be something that the industry is going to standardize on. And we're seeing a lot of that, right? The NTIA has got a fantastic effort happening right now to look at how do we, as an industry, rally around that. But what we predicted back in 2019, Jake, is really what we're starting to see in fruition here, is that industry is going to regulate around it. Your customers are going to require that you ship it with, any kind of software release or any kind of purchase. It should be part of the contractual requirements at some point to get a copy of that SBOM. And I think it's going to really, my prediction going forward is there are going to be companies that are left behind because they're not understanding the impact that's going to have to their software, sales model. You have to think about highly regulated in industries like financial and medical, who are not only going to require that SBOM, but they're going to figure out quickly how to establish minimum requirements in that SBOM. Meaning, hey, if you're running, this out of date something, we're going to come back and tell you we're not going to purchase your software until you clean it up. That's what's going to end up being the reality. Companies aren't going to take, they're not going to purchase software that doesn't have some kind of a security baseline built in. And again, my prediction is I think a lot of companies are going to be caught off guard because they're not going to have really thought through how to build a program around managing that. And this is going to be key. Again, changing the way you you engineer software to be able to meet some of these things isn't a fast process for any company, let alone some, BlackBerry where, we're shipping software daily. It takes a long time to, hire experts and think about security baselines and, ensure that you can be helpful and resourceful to your engineering teams. And this is where I think, my one piece of advice I would leave on SBOM is for other executives to really think about how are you going to establish a program to be resourceful to your revenue stream instead of forceful. Product security and security teams in general are looked at as huge speed bumps. And so how do you stop becoming a speed bump and start being part of the revenue stream? How do you become an asset to your engineering organization to allow them to ship an SBOM and confidently send that out the door, knowing that the highly regulated and financial and medical and all of your customers who care about security, whether or not the government's telling them to or not, how do you ship that out the front door and make sure that you're confident knowing that your customer's getting a secure product and that you've done your job? That is difficult to be a resourceful resource or a resource in general. So we take very much a consulting view internally. Our team is really here to help our product teams achieve that. But if you're not building that as a program right now and really understanding how your supply chain in software, your own supply chain from your own vendor management to your own release of software, if you're not building that program, you're going to be left really scrambling. And I think that's going to be a big shocker when it all comes to reality, Jake. It's going to be a tough one.
So I want to, I'm a huge fan of the maturity model that you released. So I want to tie back a little bit of this executive order to the open source maturity model. How do you think that's going to apply, or how do you think maybe companies can look at that maturity model to help them figure out how to deal with this executive order a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jake. I'm so glad you asked, because what that maturity model allows you to do is take a step-by-step approach. It is impossible for any company doing nothing right now to be, in a month from now, to be, to even think that they would have this amazingly mature model. And I love the maturity model because it allows you to kind of take a step one, start here. Step two, start, do this next. Step three, do this next. I've seen very large companies doing absolutely nothing, adopt that model and be successful. Every company is going to look different because everybody's starting from a different place. But the key here, Jake, is you have to start somewhere. I've, again, recently talked to a few executives that have not started anything, and they're beginning to panic because they're watching this executive order gain more traction. And I'm here to tell you it's gaining more traction. So start somewhere. Take a model, any model, mine. Look at those different parts of the pyramid and start in that step one, and at least start getting telemetry and start getting a plan together, because that's kind of where you have to start. But yes, the executive order and this model definitely go hand in hand. And I'm hoping people can take that and use it, because it's at least a place to start.
So, the world continues to change. Software is even more critical in the physical world as we've seen it. And, in BlackBerry, you guys have been focused on all kinds of things, connected cars, the embedded devices. And so I know for you, security is so important. It's been built in. From shipping handsets to now all these other things that you guys are doing, what's different about all this sort of physical connected embedded device stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. And boy, working for a company like BlackBerry, we were so ahead of our time. We didn't, at the time we made all these grand predictions, myself included, and now here we are. I think what's really different is looking at I'll focus just on one particular thing, Jake, which is kind of the more of the IoT space on the side of BlackBerry. And you look at things that are up and coming like Ivy, and looking at the connected car. Again, where BlackBerry's really ahead of its time, you know, with QNX as a product and partnering with Amazon and working on Ivy, and how do we understand the data flowing through a car, and products like Jarvis, which again, Jarvis is really key because it's taking something really, really, really complicated. When you think about the ECUs in a vehicle, and you think about how many vendor components go into that car, and you think about that rolling attack surface, and you think about electric vehicles and all the changes coming, Jarvis was just really ahead of its time in being able to, you know, understand that attack surface and get down into the depths of software where, you know, tier one suppliers will ship something and say, oh yeah, it's secure. And, you know, Jarvis kind of allows you to dig into that and go, yeah, no, it's not. So really, we were, again, kind of ahead of our time in looking at the needs for secure software and the needs for products to actually do security. It's been fascinating to be a part of BlackBerry through the transition, going from, you know, I worked on Android as a handset. I worked in the 30-day patching program that was, again, the first of its kind for a vendor to come out and do, you know, commit to doing that. And now here we are all the way fast forward into looking at security of, you know, software in a vehicle. It's been a pretty amazing transition, and it's been pretty awesome to be part of a company that really, that's our first priority. So yeah, it's been a wild ride, but I'm really looking forward to looking at how products like Ivy are really going to continue to kind of change the world. It's been a lot of fun.
So how do you, so let's talk terms of software releases in terms of frequency, right? You know, when you're thinking about these different endpoints, right? Embedded devices, connected cars, all these sorts of things. While that may change over time, right now the frequency of release, or those major releases, which I've heard you talk about, they're few and far between compared to where maybe a security practitioner would say, oh, just pull out this fix or this patch or whatever. So, but how do you view that from a security standpoint, working with software teams when there's not as many frequent releases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and, you know, one of the great things about having a centralized product security function is it allows our organization to scale both like the CI/CD side of, you know, that continuous release, and it allows us to look at embedded systems which might have a different release cycle. So we take a very holistic approach. And my guidance here to anybody listening is definitely to have a security baseline and to know the release cycle. It is really critical to look at, if you're only going to ship a product or you know, a maintenance release to a product, a big release or a big image, you know, out every 6 months. Well, then, you know, you really have to look at what does that security debt look like over that last 6 months, and maybe you have to build in a frequency of hot fixes that are just dedicated to security. And this is, again, when you have a centralized model, you're not a product team looking to figure that out. You're looking at it from a product security model of, okay, that's great if you're going to release software every 6 months, but you need a maintenance release then. You need to plan for security-only maintenance releases, and they need to go at every interval. And you know, that sounds really simple, Jake, but I can tell you, getting into the part where you go, you know, no executive wants to go into a budgeting review meeting or, you know, planning to say, hey, engineering team, I know you're making money, but I need 10% held back of your resources for security maintenance releases. But I can tell you it's critical. You have to do it. And when you, the beauty of it is when you have a product security centralized, you know, model, you can then show the cost savings. You can actually go in, again, if you look at that talk that we did at Black Hat, you can go and look at, okay, that open source, you know, attack surface is costing you X amount of dollars. If we do this maintenance release, we're actually going to save money. And I think that's really, really key, is being able to look at all the, you know, software products you ship or all the different kinds of releases that you have and make a different plan for each of them, because they're not the same. It is not a one size all fits model. CI/CD is definitely different than a, you know, a software release cycle that's, you know, looking at a golden image every 6 months. Those are different, and you have to plan for them differently. CI/CD is moving so fast that you have to take a different approach. You know, those longer term software releases, you've really got to strategize how in between you're going to make sure that, you know, you're looking at your attack surface holistically. So it you know, it needs a plan. It needs a plan.
So I know you're working on a lot of things right now, but can you give us maybe just a quick blurb on, what's going on with the NIST SSDF, that framework, and the ISO standards that you're working on?
Yeah, and this is the, great question, Jake. This is the amazing part about being part of product security right now. Back in the day when you and I just first began talking and things, there was so much less guidance for us. We were sort of ship sailing with our hands in the air, trying to tell everybody that security was important. Again, years ago that was sort of the way, but now we have these great standards that we can fall back on. And I feel like the NIST SSDF framework and the executive order are timed just perfectly, because the NIST SSDF framework really gives us a solid backing for anybody watching this to take to your executive team and saying, this is the way, this is what we have to be doing. It allows you to build practices and policies based and security baselines built on, NIST standards. So that has been a huge game changer, really, to validate lots of stuff we've already been doing, which is fantastic. We're ahead of the game, which is great. But it allows any company to really take a view of that. And to any executive who might not understand exactly what the executive order means for software development, it allows the NIST framework really allows you to go, hand in hand with that executive order, saying, if I look at ISO 29147 and 30111, and I understand how to handle vulnerabilities and how to disclose, the NIST SSDF framework will allow us to shift left and really build that in, and that's critical to take that NIST SSDF framework right now and look at your, software development lifecycle and ask, do you have a secure software development lifecycle, or is security really an afterthought that we're just thinking about kind of at the end? And I speak internally a lot about breaking up concrete. Because, when you ship a product and you're going to try to figure out how to undo a bunch of bad security practices, it's like breaking up concrete, and it's very expensive. So I think the NIST SSDF framework, as part of the executive order, or using them kind of in tandem internally, has allowed us to really create framework that allows us to create a stronger SSDL and again, reduce the cost of secure software.
All right, we're in the home stretch. So, as long as I've known you, you've always been a very people-driven, people-first leader. You've had a huge focus on communication, over-communication. If you think about it now, with the rapid move to virtual working, all the craziness that's been going on in the world, what tips do you have for security teams that are trying to still figure out how to work closely with their development teams? Any thoughts to share there?
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one. One of the benefits that we had as a virtual team before was that we were really prepared for this. But I've gotten a lot of questions over time for, how as a security leader do you make sure that you're following your release cycles? Because engineering teams are over here trying to, generate, product releases to generate revenue, and you're over here trying to make sure that they don't get out the gate, without all the security baselines being met. So that, it is difficult. It is very difficult. But however, we have standardized checkpoints in place where we are continuing to meet as teams. No matter what the day of the week is, we didn't stop doing that stuff. We never stopped doing that stuff. And again, if those engineering leaders, if you're focusing on building that relationship before, and those engineering leaders view you as a resource and view you as a consultant, to how they're going to ship that secure software, they're going to lean on you and make sure that you're part of that conversation, no matter what time of day it is, no matter what location. So we have regular checkpoints, Jake, where we don't miss them. Engineering knows what to expect from us. And that goes again to that pre-planning of the program and getting those templates in place and, having those checkpoints. If they know what to expect from you and they know where you are in the process, you're not a speed bump anymore. Then you become a, I couldn't do business without you partner, which is always the goal for me and my organization is, I want our product teams to want us to be part of the process, and they do. So again, I think it goes back to how do you build the relationship with your product organization? How do you get them to learn to trust you as a trusted advisor? That's always the goal for my team, is to be trusted advisors and never to be speed bumps. So, if you lead with that first, you become part of the product, you become part of the product release cycle, and not just another team telling them, they can't do something. So I think that relationship and the communication it's just key.
So, it's been strange with the lack of in-person security conferences. In fact, I just booked a flight to go out to Black Hat, and it feels odd doing it. But how do you think, these lack of security conferences, in-person conferences, has impacted the industry, and has it even impacted security research and vulnerability disclosure from your view?
Yeah, great question, man. I think we thought at first, I remember when we were first kind of, it seems like eons ago, Jake, but when we were first sort of working from home and everybody was stopping, we got together as a team and we thought, what is this going to do to vulnerability disclosure and research? Like, what will the load and velocity in our, what will that look like? And we were sort of dreaming on, would it slow down? Would it get, would it be more? We're finding we're finding some interesting things. One, we found that attackers have a lot more time on their hands. So we have not been, without things to research. We have not been without things to look at. So we haven't found a slowdown at all. In fact, we've found that I think attackers are getting more creative. So that's that. It is definitely, I felt that with you, Jake. The lack of in-person security conferences is going to be hard, because I think we do a lot of development as leaders by kind of those one-off conversations that we have in person, sitting down after we've given a talk, or, we can sit down and have a cup of coffee or whatever and just catch up. And that has definitely impacted, I feel like, executives, is how we talk to each other. But I've also found kind of the opposite, in that I've had a lot more people reaching out to me just over email or giving me a call. There's been a lot more, I think, forced communication for, certain executives that, really feel empowered to work together, to actually just pick up the phone and call instead of waiting for that conference where you're going to run into that person, which, we do that too. So I'm looking, just like you, I'm looking forward to getting back into kind of, the realm of conference tracks and hallway talks and things like that. I think as an industry, for us, we're dependent on that. So I'm looking forward to that, very much so.
So for someone that's been watching this, and they're working at a company and they're struggling with too much work as it is, too many vulnerabilities, and now you're telling them all about this process and templates and maturity and all these things to do, and they're thinking, well, I'm not BlackBerry, I don't have the resources to do that. What do you say to them of how where should they really start with getting an OSS program together and getting started with that risk-based vulnerability management program? How do you get someone moving in a positive direction?
Wow, great question. So Jake, go back, you hit it spot on when we started talking today. Go back to that Black Hat talk, that original one. I can't believe how spot on we actually were with that model. Really, that's where you start. It is, I'll be honest and say, yes, it's a journey, but you have to start somewhere. And honestly, if the one thing you take away today from watching this is, not starting anywhere should not ever be an option. You have to tackle it. It's not going to go away. Open source software is not going anywhere. Open source software vulnerability, load and velocities, not going to go away, and it's not going to get any easier. So start today. Go watch that talk. Pick the bottom of that pyramid. Start that maturity journey and start reaching out to people. I'm always open to questions. I talk to a lot of people. You can always just, I'm on LinkedIn. You can shoot me a note. Happy to chat. You've got to just start asking the right questions. You've got to start looking at, vendor partners such as yourself. You've got to start talking to, again, people like Jake. You've got to start reaching out to people like Jake for advice, because it's not going to go away. And I think for a lot of years, Jake, you and I even watched a lot of companies kind of put their heads in the sand and say, okay, well, I've got to worry about my front door. And now we're seeing supply chain attacks, where, attackers are using an opportunity to bypass 99% of an organization's security investment to get into the supply chain. That should be a huge wake-up call to everybody. I mean, every company has to think about the fact that all that security investment, if they get in through your supply chain, they can bypass all of that. That's a huge wake-up call. So, my advice is to go back and watch that Black Hat talk. And remember that this was, years ago, and here we are. So to start, but the foundation and the principles of that talk are still the same. You still have to start right at the very beginning. And I think that talk is just key. We walk through every single step of how to create, an open source maturity model for yourself. And even if you're a one man or one woman show, you can still watch that talk and still do those, those one man, one woman show types of things. I get a lot of really small companies to reach out to me about, okay, I'm 2 people. What do I do? Right? There's lots of things you can do just as a 1 or a 2 person show. So again, key is to start somewhere and just not to ignore it.
So that brings us to the end. And the last question that I have for you, what's the next thing? What else is on your mind? Can you call your shot now so that we come 5 years later, we can say, remember right on that Right Security show when I called it?
I know. Okay. You know what, Jake? I'm going to take a pause on SBOM because I really think SBOM is going to trigger the need for the product security mindset. I want to focus on SBOM because it is so big. I feel like SBOM is bigger than anything, Jake, that you and I have talked about or you and I have tried to work through. I think it's going to encompass so many companies off guard that I'm gonna pull out my get out of jail free card right now and just say I'm gonna hang on SBOM for a while and make sure that we're prepared for it. Make sure that we can be an industry leader and help other companies prepare for it, because the supply chain, the software supply chain, that's my prediction that is going to become the priority. So I think we just need to hang out right here where we are. I'm not going to make any more future predictions just because I think I have, there's a lot of work in our industry ahead of us. So we'll hang there.
Perfect. Thank you. Christine, Vice President of Product Security at BlackBerry. I highly recommend you watch her previous talks, review her work. She's published such amazing things. And like she said, reach out to her directly. She is super open, willing to help. Any questions you have, I definitely recommend reach out to her. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure as always.
Thanks, Jake.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of The Right Security. As always, we'll have more details and links in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review, all that sort of stuff. And you can learn more about RBS at our website. Thank you for tuning in.